All right, so it's going to kind of be like a new series, introducing more so like neurodivergency and how that works from a spiritual and a mystical perspective, but first the mystical and then the spiritual. Okay, so neurodivergency is basically the scientific study of different neurotypes, basically unique forms of nervous systems. And neuro is just sort of, for nervous system, which is the same thing. So don't get confused with that. That's why it's called neuro then divergency. And different forms of science that study this, or fields of science that study this shit, is like neuroscience, neurology, as well as cross studies like psychology, and criminology. Yeah, criminology. And they use this whenever they want to profile criminals, basically cluster bees and shit that be doing like fuck shit um, in society, so-called society, or in the system that the system doesn't agree with. So if it's not them, they be like, hell nah, you ain't finna go out there doing that weird shit, hell nah. And then they try to pull up on them. They profile them, and that's what investigations, interrogations is for. They trying to figure out how your brain works, basically your brain and your nervous system. And it's all the same thing. But this series is gonna go into kind of just gonna introduce the different kinds of neurodivergencies like schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, different forms of trauma-based nervous systems like PTSD, CPTSD, DID, OCD, etc., which aren't disorders, but they're unique nervous systems that function in a particular way or a specific kind of way that it's not common within society, or just no, actually, it's just not normalized within society. It's pretty it's absolutely normal, but it's not normalized. So stigmatized, or which is just stereotyped to be ill-minded, but it ain't ill though. It's just unique in its own way, and that's because these specific kinds of neurotypes they function within different dimensions than other or more normalized neurotypes, which are usually cluster Bs like Machiavellianism or psychopathy, narcissism, sadism, paranoia, or paranoid, narcissism, yeah, and um, histrionic. Okay, so those are more sort of normalized, as well as BPD, which is borderline personality, not BP, which is bipolar. So bipolar is also gonna be introduced within this series as well, and it'll kind of break down the differences between why this one is normalized and the other one isn't normalized, and that's because along with bipolar and autism, OCD, ADHD, schizophrenia, etc., why those ones are normalized and why this one is, okay, within the system, which is referred to as society by most. So the first one is going to be DID. So DID within psychology, neuroscience, and neurology, they'll refer to it as basically a fractured kind of mind. Okay, something is fractured within the mind, and that's referred to as the personality. The personality is connected, or basically an expression of a genetic, component. So these genetic components are referred to as traits. That's why it's referred to as personality traits. So different traits of a personality is basically just another word for trauma. Okay, trauma responses. So the way that gene expresses itself is referred to as a trauma response or personality expression. So it's like that. So DID expresses different personalities within the mind, and it appears to be that it's a different, spirit or different person talking. It's not a split personality. It's just different spirits, which are the ancestors or blood relatives of that soul or spirit expressing itself through the minds of that individual. So the individual is expressing itself, and as he or she or it is expressing itself, what happens is the ancestors or the relatives that have a connection to the gene that is expressing itself, that is like that they're genetically connected to through that genetic expression, they're able to also express themselves in that moment as well. So if there was like any trauma that was unresolved, or how they say the soul spirits or ghosts or ancestors may have unresolved blah blah blah, like issues or things that they haven't dealt with before they passed on, blah blah blah, stuff like that. That stuff presents because those with the idea are sensitive to the spiritual and ancestral connection of the members within that bloodline that have that same trauma as them. So if you have the same trauma as that ancestor, it will show up as you express your personality, as you express your trauma, as you express those traits within yourself. And it won't just be you expressing yourself. It'll also be your ancestors expressing themselves through you. And the ancestor that that trauma occurred to, most recently or whenever, not whenever, as ever, at all. Like it could be anything like rape, assault, anything for real, any form of trauma. They'll also express themselves through you to show you what had happened, how they felt about it, the way they, who they are, so it's them that trauma that you have is connected to. You might not have even gone through that trauma yourself, but because you're sensitive to that, to your genetics, within your genetic bloodline, it's like they'll show themselves to let you know that they have unhealed or unresolved issues, as scientists might call it, so that you can heal that shit and then ground your shadow, do the shadow work, so that way the bloodline can clear up that trauma, aka that karma within that bloodline. So it's basically the same karmic ties are presenting themselves through you. And in some cases, if you're aware of that, you can basically allow them to switch in between. You can basically express yourself freely between those personalities, because some souls and some spirits don't, they don't even realize what's going on, so it just happens. Whereas that trauma, whenever that trauma is triggered, their ancestor or their relative will kind of just jump through and attempt to protect their descendant or their blood relative within that moment, that is aware or able to, who has activated that genetic to kind of like, allow them to express themselves in that moment. So, and it's like that ancestral attempt to protect, shield, and guard themselves from being traumatized again. So they're just protecting their bloodline in their own way. They're protecting themselves, but because they haven't resolved that trauma, it seems like they're not just protecting themselves. It seems like they're trying to or they're not trying to heal from that shit. It seems like they're just trying to defend themselves. It comes off maybe defensive or agitated. They seem like they got an attitude, different things, like they're irritable, because that's them trying to protect not only their spirit, the spirit of their bloodline, the spirits within their bloodline, from going through that exact same trauma. Or if they already did, now they're really like, as somebody in the streets might say, like on 10 about that shit, for real, like, because they're not trying to go through that over again. They don't want nobody related to them going through that, so they're trying to stop the karmic cycle or prevent it from occurring over and over and over again, as